Hey everyone, and welcome to Face Tricks and Eye Stuff. It's part 4 in my Procreate 4 process videos. Not only did Procreate put folders in, but you can put folders within folders, which is awesome. So we're going to take these face layers that we've got right now, and we're just going to stack them all into a folder. This will make our organization going forward a little bit nicer. We're going to name it Face, because we're super creative. Get those lips in there too. Now on this layer is where we will start doing some additional face tricks to really make the face come to life. Regardless of whether or not somebody is wearing makeup, there are different things that your face does. Makeup usually either enhances these or masks these. There's lots of different things that you can do there. But what we're going to do is more of the enhancing them category. So on the face, there's a lot of different things that it does as far as colors. You can look up a lot of rules around this. I'm not going to go over all the rules right now, but one of the ones that I always stick to is making sure that we get blush in some of the right spots. So I redden the nose, I usually redden the cheeks a little bit, and I redden the ears quite a bit. Once you start looking at these types of details, you start looking at that in the real world a lot. You start realizing how red people's fingers are, or how red their nose might be, or not even just red. You start noticing all of the other sort of colors. I don't necessarily work in a style, like a super classical style that might represent all of those. I try to go for a little bit more of almost a symbolic or emotional or expressive way of representing these things. It's a little bit more simplified, but it also gets you a lot when you actually do that. In order to give us a little bit of contrast too from the neck, since we're not gonna paint the body, but it'll just sort of help read everything right now, I'm just gonna put a bit of a drop on the neck there so that we can see the head being separate from the body. So now let's get back to the face stuff. So we've got that blush in there. All it is a bright red all the way to top right, or a pink depending on sort of where you want to go with it. You can even go a little orangey, and it's lowered in opacity. But on this layer, what we're going to do is we're going to take a purple, a very pale purple, on a layer that's set to multiply, and we're going to deal with the eyes. Now, depending on how saturated this is, you could really make it look like eyeshadow. You can make it look really desaturated and dark and make it look like people have all those sort of burst capillaries and their eyes are really dark and all that. You can do a lot of things with this, but for this right now, in order to go for just a bit of a natural look, I'm going to put this purple on her eyelids and bleeding a little bit out onto the sides, and then we're just going to lower that quite a bit, and it's going to add some additional dimension and color variation to her face. So we've got the blush in there, we've got the eyelid thing in there, her lips are already colored, we handled that in the last video. So those are some pretty big ways to get more color variation into the face. If she were a dude, you could also go with a 5 o'clock shadow, and depending on if she were evil or super pale, you could do things like veins under the skin, or there's a lot of things there. It's going to get you a lot of variation. Now here's where I just sort of emphasize that this nose is pretty jacked. We've got this pretty rough part under here. Normally I would go in and make sure that that's all fleshed out and nice fleshed out, no pun intended, but smoother and looks good, but we're not going to bother with that right now. We're just going to sort of move on and try to get to more sections, more tips, I guess you could say. So let's move on to the eyes. That feels like a good place to go next. First things I usually color is I usually paint in the cornea part. Here we're going to select the cornea. We're using a soft brush. We're going to start painting in where the light's coming from. Now that original flat that I did for the cornea is sort of more of an educated stab in the dark, so we're going to actually adjust that a little bit. We're going to warm it up, make it a little darker, and start tweaking some of these values a little bit. Did I say warm it up? I meant cool it off. Forget what I said. All of this is nonsense. Don't believe anything I say. Now we're gonna bring it up again another step, and now this is all to just sort of render the eyeball as if it were alone in the world, but we're gonna have to add in some additional things to really make this eye work. Like we're gonna have to cut the shadow off exactly where the hair lands, and I can't remember if I do it in this. I know that's not the best tutorial, that I can't remember whether or not I do things, but I would also add a little bit more darkening around the edges of the eyes just to sort of put a little bit more turning of form in there, but I don't think I actually do. So now we're cutting off what I just shaded, where the nose casts, where the hair casts down, and then we're going to move on to the iris. Ha! Just kidding. I do add some darkening in here. Let's see what happens. I'm on the edge of my seat just as much as you guys are. Wow, who saw that coming? I didn't. Okay, so let's move on to the iris. So here we're going to try and respect the exact same things that we did in the cornea, which is like where the light's falling. So I'm going to start by just painting in a color that feels like the next step up for those eyes. Usually I actually plug in the pupil first, but I just was sort of trying to move fast through this. We all know that it's going to land somewhere in the center, so I can reliably paint this light exactly where it's supposed to go. Okay, now we're going to sample the iris and darken it so we can generate the pupil. Just take a hard brush and plug a circle right in there. Bonk. Boy, she looks pretty crazy, doesn't she? Here's where I was like, wait, something is off here. So I just turned on my reference just to see how it looked in the reference. And by reference, I mean my rough lines. So I clear them and then reapply. Now, even though I put them more where I feel they're supposed to be, she still obviously looks crazy. That's because most people, when they're naturally resting, their upper eyelid actually breaks like right above their pupil. So when it's like this, where she's emoting a lot more and it's a lot higher, the characters can look crazy unless you sort of add this gradient. It's a little bit of a symbolic way of drawing an eye instead of a super realistic way, but that does tend to happen in real life to some degree as well. So it's sort of a fake in order to pull off lessening the intensity of somebody's pupil. Now, I do a lot of things when I'm doing eyes. I'm not going to do all of them here. I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. If you go through past videos, you'll see a lot of different things that I do with eyes, a lot of tricks, extra tweaks here and there. In fact, I'm not even going to color in the sort of like eye meat on this just so that we can move through it. Here's a really simplistic way of doing a shine. You're probably used to doing this yourself, and I do it depending on the piece that I'm doing, which is just a white blob that's then been duplicated and blurred, and that way you get some sort of a glow off of it. Another thing you can do here is actually try to incorporate a real reflection. So real reflections usually come off as a bit of a white layer, and then anything that's sort of not stark white or close to white or just not bright in general fades to transparent when it reflects in an eye. That's just a way to get there, I guess you could say, without completely referencing a real reflection. This is just one way to sort of try and do that. So here I just go with something that's fairly simplistic. It might be like a window that has two bars on it, or two I guess parts of the frame. It'd be like a 3-section window, and then I erase a little bit off of that. You can see here then I lower the opacity on it, and then on top of it I start painting in black like a city skyline. So it's almost like she's looking towards a window, and outside of that window is a city. So that's sort of where we are going with this shine. There's the main shine, so you could say that that's maybe the sun in the distance, and then we're going to paint the buildings on top of the shine, and then we're going to erase away where the buildings are. This is just a simple way to do it so that I could really show you what I was doing. So we have the shine selected, the reflection selected, and then we're just painting in there real quick some buildings. And now we're just going to take the buildings and select them, and then we're going to clear them away from the white shine part, reflection part, and there we go. Now this is crude. It's a little noisy also, depending on what you're going for. It could be really distracting, but this is a way to do this. And then I'm going to take the whole thing and just duplicate it over to the other eye so that you can see the overall effect. However, again, this is not a good warping. This isn't a good way to do it, I guess you could say, but you can just sort of get the gist of it, I guess. So there's sort of two ways of doing the eyes. The eye shine, there's a lot of ways you can do this, and there's better ways and ways that sort of are a little bit more considerate. You can make a giant one like this, I guess, if you want to, and go nuts with it. But the real point here is that there's super realistic ways to do this, and you can observe real life and try to get those. Or there are more stylized design reasons why you might go with something else, and it's sort of up to you to figure out which route you want to go with something like that. Ultimately, there's sort of no wrong answer to this, as long as you have some like legitimate reasons as to why you might have chosen one thing over the other. For some last touches there, I'm just going to put some bounce light from her hair on her corneas and on her iris. It's just sort of casting down. It's a little crude, but it's sort of a nice touch there at the end. So thanks for watching. On the next and final one of this segment, we are going to go over finishing touches. So I'll see you there. And if you're looking for me on the internet, these are the places where you can find me.